Hello. I'm an unpublished author, and I'm going to be giving you all some writing advice today. So let's jump right into it, huh? I've written down a couple of questions, well, about 32 to be exact. 32 questions related to writing a novel, and we'll just see where it takes us, guys. Let's just jump right into it, huh? Okay, so the first question that I've written down here is, how do I start writing a novel? This is a pretty rudimentary question. Now, I should preface these answers by saying that they're all going to be pretty subjective. I think I have a pretty unique writing process when it comes to that kind of stuff. I know that Stephen King, and I'll probably mention him a couple times because I've read his book on writing, which I recommend any writer, any novice writer read. But yeah, every author, every writer has a very unique style that they employ when they're writing, like a unique format that they follow, a unique structure that they follow in terms of their writing process, not necessarily the novel process itself. Like the story process, I mean. So what the advice that I give you today is going to be pretty subjective to what I do, but I have written a novel, so it's not published yet, but it's going to be. But yeah, I feel like I can speak to some of this stuff just based on my experience having written this novel. Now, for me, the idea usually comes first. This is, like I said, pretty subjective. I know there's plenty of writers, plenty of authors who say that they get characters first. That's not been me, not for this process, at least for my first novel. I do have another novel that I'm like tinkering with in my brain. I haven't written anything down for it yet. But I think for that one, I got characters first. I got some character ideas, and then I was like, okay, that would be interesting to write a novel, and then I sort of formulated the idea around them. But usually for me, what comes first is I have an idea for a plot, and then the characters sort of fill in around that plot. Do I need to outline my story first, or can I just start writing? Now, for me, for anyone who sort of has like borderline OCD or who gets very caught up in the planning process, which I have been in the past, and I've sort of broken out of that now, I think that it can be helpful if you're just conceptualizing the novel to have an outline, a rough outline of what you want the novel to be about. Whether that outline is physical, so you write it down, or whether it's in your brain and you just like are mentally keeping track of like, this is the order of the story beats that I want to follow, is up to you. You can also do note cards. There's plenty of different ways to outline a novel. There's also something called the reverse outline, which I can't think of what it is right now, but I'll probably pop up somewhere on the screen to explain what that is. But one of my professors recommended that when I was in school. There's plenty of different ways to outline stuff. I find it personally, if I outline something, that I try to adhere to it too strictly. So I outlined, when I first started writing this novel that I finished, I outlined everything. I sort of had a rough estimation of what I wanted to happen, how I wanted it to happen. And then when I started writing, like one of my earlier drafts, I would literally just follow that to a T, and I found it very restrictive. I didn't feel like I had the freedom to, okay, this part isn't really working out, let me change it. I felt bad for going against the outline. So it's really up to what type of person you are. If you're the kind of person who needs to have a plan, then having an outline can be good for starting, because that usually, it hinders my progress. If I don't know what I want to write, if I don't know the progress that I'm going to make, if I don't know how the story is roughly going to unfold, then that sort of like hinders my process of writing. So if you're a person like that, if you're like me and you need to have some outline or understanding of how the story is going to unfold, then an outline could be helpful for you. If you're also like me in that it can be restrictive and you find yourself wanting to adhere only to that outline and not deviating from that, then an outline could be a little bit devastating for that. Long story short, I started out with an outline. I ditched it halfway through because I found that it was a little bit too restrictive for me, and I was sticking to it too much, to the point where new ideas that I was getting that were better for the story and the characters, I was putting on the side because they weren't following the outline. So eventually I ditched the outline. So yeah, planning process, I think having an outline could be helpful, but don't try to stick to it too rigidly. How long should my first novel be? This is another great question. It varies. My novel is a horror novel, and in the horror genre, there's genre specifications, so it depends on what the genre is. If I'm not mistaken, I think for like, this is all going to be rough estimations, so don't like take my word 100% on this, because obviously I'm unpublished as of yet. For horror novels, I think publishing houses and agents want stuff that's a little bit longer, so maybe 375 to 400 pages, and like more than that typically. Anything below 300 pages, I think, is like generally, regardless of genre, is pretty hard to publish, just because that's sort of like novella territory. But like I said, it depends on the genre. I think YA can be a little shorter. Sci-fi usually is much longer. If you're writing a sci-fi novel, that usually tends to trend like 500 plus pages. Horror, like I said, usually upwards of 300 pages for horror. Literary fiction, that can be shorter. Biographies, that kind of autobiographies, that sort of thing, that can be shorter too. Those are all variable lengths. But I think if you're going for like specific rigid genres, it really just depends based on what my professors have told me who have published stuff in the past before. It usually just depends on genre. I'd say write however much you feel like you need to write for the story. It's usually a good idea to, for your first draft, write everything down, write as much as you possibly can, and then trim it later, because you don't want to be in a position where you've finished like a draft, you're almost done with the novel and you think it's like ready to be published. And then, you know, you have readers who tell you, or an agent that tells you, oh, you need more. We need more content. Like, it's easier to trim than it is to add. Usually, I think that's like the rule of thumb. How do I create compelling characters? This is another fantastic question. That is a difficult question, too. My characters in my first novel are inspired by people that I knew in my real life. Drawing on people you know in real life, not necessarily painting them one for one. So you have a friend and you basically just adapt his personality one for one to the character in the novel. That can work sometimes, of course, if your friend is okay with that, of course, if you let them know. But I think generally drawing on people that you know from your real life, because it can be a little daunting to come up with characters if you're starting out writing a novel and you're trying to, or a short story either, you know, depending on whatever you're writing. It can be daunting to come up with characters, scenarios, whatever, what have you. So I feel like drawing inspiration from people in your real life is very helpful. Drawing inspiration from people from shows, from characters from shows can also be helpful, like personalities and things like that. Not literally ripping the characters that you see in television and movies and stuff, because obviously that is borderline copyright infringement or whatever. It could just be a little bit boring to just copy and paste someone. But drawing inspiration from basically characters and shows, video games, movies, your real life, whatever have you. That's usually how I do it. But a compelling character, that's really the backbone of a novel. I used to think that it was the story, it was the plot that was the backbone of the novel. Like, if you have an interesting plot, a unique plot, that is what will sell your book. But now I've definitely switched to, if you have interesting characters, that is what sells your plot, because it's basically like everything has been done before. Every single idea that you can possibly have for a story basically has been done. So it's like we're all sort of writing variations of the same story, but what makes each story unique is the characters within that story. Usually it's creating a character that's multifaceted. They have dimensions to them. They're not just like, oh, they're a very they're like a solidly good character, they have no flaws. That can be boring. It can be done advantageously if throughout the story they get more flawed, or they learn that they do have a flaw, or that altruistic value that they hold is actually detrimental to the plot of the story. That can be useful. But it's like, you don't want to have one-dimensional characters who are like basically tropes, who just have one characteristic and that's like their whole thing. You want to have characters that are multi-layered, like human beings. They're complex, you know, humans are very complex. So you want to have characters that are equally as complex. They have vices, they have flaws, things going on with them outside of the plot. Because the plot, you obviously want the characters to drive the plot forward, or to be involved in driving the plot forward. But you also want to have them have lives outside of the plot that is also like spurring on their actions in the story itself. What point of view should I write in? This is another great question. My novel is third person. It's 3 different narrators, third person omniscient. It depends on the type of story you want to tell. I know Caroline Kepnes, for the You novels, she wrote Joe's story in first person, because obviously it's very narrative focused on Joe's perspective. So obviously telling it in first person as we're literally watching Joe stalk these people and do all this crazy stuff, that makes sense for his character. A lot of the novels that I've read are in third person, and I feel like it's a very easy perspective to write in, just because you don't have to be in the characters. You don't really necessarily have to have the characters have a unique voice. When you're writing in first person, especially if there's multiple narrators in the story, each narrator has to have a unique voice. So if you're writing first person, it's like three narrators, for example, which is what I struggled with in my first drafts of my novel, because originally it was in first person for each of these different narrators that I had. I struggled to differentiate between them in their speaking style and their thinking style, so I switched back to third person and it became much easier to write it. So it really just depends on your narrative, on the characters, how many characters you have, how many narrators you have, the kind of story that you're trying to tell. Second person perspective, which is you, not the novel You, which is when you say you. I don't think I've seen a single novel written like that. I think that would be very interesting to do. I've written maybe 1 or 2 short stories in that perspective in second person, which is cool. It's gimmicky, but it could be done. It just depends. It's very, very specific on what the story is that you're trying to tell. How do I stay motivated to finish my novel? This is a great question. I struggled a lot when I was writing it, because it's just like, I've been writing this novel for about 5 or 6 years now, and I've just now finished it. Throughout that process, there were definitely times where it waxed and waned. My motivation waxed and waned. That's usually a hump you have to overcome. When you first get an idea for a novel and you first start writing it down, you're sort of like bursting forth with ideas and you're writing everything down and you're feeling almost manic, like you want to write so bad. And then I think every early writer hits a stopping point where it's like, okay, the ideas have sort of stopped. You're feeling like a lack of motivation. You're not 100% sure where the story's going, and you're not sure that it's good. And then you start questioning yourself. And then when you start questioning yourself, then the whole story starts unraveling. And you're like, okay, why am I even doing this? I'm putting so much time into this. If no one's going to read it, what if no one likes it? What if no one cares about it? What if it's not good? What if I think it's bad? I think it's bad. And then you stop. you hit a stopping point and you're like, okay, I'm gonna give up on this. But it's really crucial that you don't do that. I feel like pacing yourself is pretty valuable. When you're starting out writing a novel, of course, you may feel that urgency to just write, get everything down on the paper, write as much as you possibly can. I feel like pacing yourself is a little bit better for that. Maybe having a limit on how much you write each day. In the space outside of writing, in the space outside of your writing time, this is time that you could be, of course, you may be working, you probably have a job or whatever. You may be working, hanging out with friends, doing other things, but you can be thinking of novel ideas while you're doing those things. So usually when I was doing those things, I would get ideas and I'd be, oh, that's a great idea. If you're writing so much every day and you're not really taking time outside of your writing to like live your life essentially, then I find that the ideas don't come as naturally. You're thinking about exactly what you're going to be writing down on the page, and you're not thinking about, okay, long-term narrative stuff, character stuff, plot elements, any of that stuff. So I feel like pace yourself. Don't rush into it. I know it's exciting to start a new project, very exciting. You want to just write and get all your ideas down because you feel like they're trapped in your brain. What I like to do is I like to keep a note in my phone's notes app where I just write down any ideas that I get during the day. Any character ideas, any story ideas, any new novel ideas, any ideas that I get for writing stuff, write it down. Just write it down so that you don't lose it. Because that's detrimental to writers if you have a good idea and then you lose it. Any dreams that you have too, because I have been inspired by dreams that I've had for novel ideas and character ideas. So write those down too. It's just important to don't put your life on hold while you're writing, because I feel like that is detrimental to the process, and that, at least that's what I found in my life. So staying motivated, very important. You obviously want to finish your novel if you're writing it. Pace yourself. What do I do if I think my writing sucks? Should I keep going? Of course, you should keep going. The best way to overcome your insecurities is just to write. Write it down. Just write. Finish whatever it is you're writing. Get feedback, of course. If you're unsure about how something sounds, there's plenty of resources today that you could access to have people give you feedback. There's plenty of subreddits where people give you writing feedback. There's plenty of like forums, I'm sure, other forums outside of Reddit that you can go to get feedback for your writing. Of course, your friends and parents in real life can give you feedback on your writing. If you're stuck at a chapter or you're stuck at a scene and you sort of want to take a break from writing it and just being in your head all the time about it, ask someone. Be like, hey, can you read this over for me really quick? Give them a brief like scenario of what's going on. If it's like deep in the novel and they don't like have any understanding of what the characters or what's happening, just be like, here's a brief synopsis. Can you like tell me what's going wrong in the scene? What could be improved? Also, reading is very, very crucial. I know so many people, especially younger people like Gen Z, such as myself, who don't read, who want to be writers. And one of the best pieces of advice that my professors gave me in college was, in order to be a writer, you have to be an avid reader. You have to. Classics, contemporary, all in between. You've got to read. You've got to read far and wide, outside of the genre that you're interested in, even stuff that you may not be interested in. You just have to read, because the best way to learn how to write is to read other people's writing, especially authors who are published, because they obviously did something right if their work is in writing, it's in publishing. I highly recommend that you just read a bunch of stuff, just long books, short books, anything in between, contemporary, like old stuff, new stuff. Just read a ton. That will really help you improve your writing, because as you're reading, you may see scenarios or characters that are similar to stuff that's happening in your own novel, and you can get inspiration like, oh, this is how this author handled it. This is how this author handled it. This is how I'm going to handle it. So you can take your own spin on it, essentially. How much time should I spend writing each day? Now, this is another great question. I feel like I'm going to say that for every question. Usually, I don't think of it in time. So it's like, you could say, I'll spend 2 hours writing a day. I usually think of it in words. I know that Stephen King, in his book on writing, he says, I think he had a limit. He had like maybe 450 words a day, something like that. Not necessarily exactly like that. I don't think he had a time limit. I think he had a word limit, like maybe 2 pages, 3 pages, something like some word limit or some page limit that he tried to follow each day. So I'd say, rather than say, okay, I'm going to write for 2 hours, because those 2 hours could be filled with you staring at a page and writing one word, I would say maybe focus on just specifics. So what I used to do is I used to write 450 words a day when I was in college, and for an independent study class that I did where I was working on my novel. Each day I aimed for 450 words. So that's about maybe a page and a half, I think, if I'm not mistaken, double spaced, of course. Times New Roman 12 font, of course. But yeah, so aim for stuff like that. Don't necessarily set a time limit on yourself, because then I feel like you could get in your head about it. Like, you could spend 2 hours writing, like I said, attempting to write, and you can only write like a few words, and then when that 2 hours is up, you're like, okay, I'm done, and you don't have to worry about it anymore, even though you didn't really how much did you actually get done in those 2 hours? So I think it's more helpful and more productive to focus on actual like quantitative limits that you set on yourself for each day. So it doesn't have to be crazy. It doesn't have to be like write 10 pages if you don't want to. Like it could be 2 pages, it could be 1 page, it could be 200 words, it could be 300 words, it could be anything like that. Set reasonable limits for yourself, and if you feel like if you've reached that limit and then you want to do more, feel free to do more. But that's basically like, that is how you make progress. Like this ties back to the question, how do I finish my novel? You want to make steps like that. You want to implement different like things into your routine like that, where you're sitting down each day, you're making sure that you're writing each day so that you can finally eventually finish your novel. What are key elements of a strong story structure? This is a difficult question. I don't actually know how to answer this 100%. I guess basically I could say stuff that surprises you, stuff that comes up when you're writing that you didn't necessarily anticipate. I can't remember who exactly said it. It might have been Stephen King, but it's like, if it's no surprise for you, then it's no surprise for the reader. You want to be surprised when writing. I think having twists, not necessarily like mystery novel twists, stuff like that, just like little twists, unexpected turns that your novel takes that you didn't necessarily anticipate, I think. And also just maybe making it unique. So maybe having it be out of order, the story be told out of order. My novel follows a pretty rigid rising action, climax, declining action format. You know, it's sort of the 3-act story. There's so many different ways to tell a story, man. I don't know. That's a tough question. I feel like I'm not super helpful on that. Do I need to know the ending before I start? This is another good question. I knew the ending of my novel before I started. I had a very strong image. It's one of the first images that I had in my brain about my novel before I started writing it, because I had a character idea in mind, and I was like, oh, that's how it's gonna end, because I just had this very strong image. I don't think that you have to know. Like I said before, if it's no surprise to you, then it's no surprise to the reader. I think if, as you're writing, you don't have to, as you're planning, you don't have to have the ending in mind as you're writing and as your characters are growing, because your characters are people. They're fictional, of course, but they are people. They have lives that you're writing. They change, they develop, they grow, they change as you're writing them. So I feel like as you're learning these characters, as you're getting more comfortable with them, as you're getting more familiar with them, you sort of get ideas and glimpses into their lives and how their stories will unfold that help you in the writing process. So I feel like just keeping an open mind when it comes to that stuff is very crucial. Sometimes, yeah, you may have a very strong, like that may be the first image you get, like I did, the ending of your novel, which is great. I like working back from that. Like it's a mental game for me to, okay, this is the ending. How do we get there? I love that. I love that mental challenge for myself. And there's some authors that do that too. If that's you, then go off, think of the ending first, and then work backwards from that. There's plenty of people who think, okay, this is where it's going to start, and then where it ends is completely different, or what I can't even imagine where it'll end. It just depends on what you're writing. It depends on you as a person. What are common mistakes first-time writers make with plot? I think thinking that it has to be very overly complex. A lot of the plot-driven questions mostly have to do with characters. I feel like it ties back into the characters. You can have a very rudimentary, very basic plot that has been done over and over again. So basically like a story of a guy falls in love with a girl falls in love with a guy. That's like a romance trope that's been done plenty of times before. So many movies, so many shows, so many novels have been written just like that. But it's what you do with your characters that make it more interesting. So I feel like you can basically do anything with a plot so long as your characters are driving that plot and the characters themselves are interesting, complex, multi-dimensional people. I don't know, I can't think of any common mistakes, because like I said, this is my first novel. Mistakes that I made when it came to plot was maybe oversimplifying how I wanted stuff to unfold. I tend to get really in my head, and I tend to get stuck in my thinking when I conceptualize something. I'm like, it has to happen this way. Be open, be fluid with your thoughts. Don't be rigid like I was. If someone is suggesting, oh, I think this will be better this way, then take that advice. Of course you don't always have to take the advice that your readers give you, or that your friends and family give you when it comes to that stuff. But I am a very advice-driven person. I like to ask people in my life for advice and guidance for different things that I'm doing. So I think that's very helpful to me. Whether or not that's helpful to you, that depends. It's writer specific. But I feel like just being open-minded, I feel like is a crucial thing when it comes to plot. What's the difference between a theme and a premise? Premise is sort of like the overarching thing that you're talking about in the novel. Like it's basically, the premise is like the plot. Think of those two as synonymous. The theme is the sort of underlying message that you're trying to convey through the text itself. So it's not overtly stated. Usually the theme is not. It's not like, oh, the theme is be nice to your friends. Like that is, if someone in the novel says that, that's pretty boring. You want it to sort of be, the theme is sort of subtext. It's underneath what the writing is. It's the character actions, like the villain story, the antagonists, what their motivation is, all that stuff maybe underlying. Stephen King has some great stuff about theme. He's like, don't force a theme. Not every novel needs a theme. I'm very theme driven just because that's my style. That's how I think. That's how my brain works. There's plenty of people who don't necessarily have a theme. Like, I don't think that the novel, has a theme. I think it's just about a guy who's a crazy stalker who's doing all this crazy stuff because he has a crush on this woman that he meets. But yeah, you don't necessarily have to have a theme. I think that forcing a theme is worse than having no theme. So, because it's very obvious to readers if you forced a theme into your work. So I feel like just Stephen King says, let it come naturally. If you find like certain colors that represent certain things repeating throughout your novel, then it was subconscious. And that's probably hinting at a theme. There was plenty of stuff like that in my novel when I was writing that. I was noticing that were thematic through lines throughout the entire thing. So I was like, okay, this could definitely be a theme. But premise equals plot. Essentially, theme is the deeper stuff, is the subtext of what is underneath what is being said. What if I get stuck or run out of ideas? This happened to me plenty of times. Like I said, I like to outline. I liked to plan everything out so I didn't get stuck, and then that ended up inevitably getting me stuck. So if you get stuck or run out of ideas, I'd say go outside, live your life. Like, don't get hung up on it. One great piece of advice that my professor gave me was just keep writing. If you get stuck on something, just write. Just free write whatever. Like, have your characters like talking, have your characters doing something that they wouldn't normally do or something that they would normally do. Just free write. It doesn't have to be something that you keep in the novel, but it's just like, if you get stuck, the worst thing you can do is stop. Usually, the worst thing you can do is stop writing altogether. Like, if you get stuck, you've written your 450 words for the day, you're stuck. You don't know what's going to happen next tomorrow. Go outside, live your life. You may get ideas. You may dream about something. You may not. If you come back the next day and you have 450 words you need to write, you don't know what you're going to write because you're stuck. Just write. It doesn't even necessarily have to be the 450 words. Just sort of start writing, see where it takes you. You may get an idea that sticks and you're like, okay, this is awesome. And then it opens up a new avenue for you to write. I think you won't run out of ideas. There's so many ideas. If your plot is solid, if your characters are solid, you won't run out of ideas. It definitely feels like you will. It feels like you win when you're writing, when you're in the midst of it. It definitely feels like you are stuck. You're out of ideas at certain points in the process. I think you just have to sort of go with it. Don't stop writing. Don't let that stop you, because that is the way you defeat yourself, is if you stop writing altogether if you get stuck. How do I deal with writer's block? Now, some people say writer's block is not real, and I would say maybe it isn't real. I feel like I definitely had my fair share of writer's block moments where I just felt like, oh, I don't know, this is not sounding good. But that's also the perfectionist in me. I definitely have a perfectionist persona in my brain where it's like everything has to be perfect. When I write it down, it has to be perfect the first time around, which is not realistic, and I don't recommend that you do that. I feel like the best way to beat writer's block is, like I said before, is just to keep writing. Write out the most basic scene. You can always go back and change the language later. Like, that is what you need to remember. That is crucial. I always thought that it has to be perfect the first time, so I don't have to go back and change it later. That is not at all what you have to do. That is not at all what you should do. I think if you're stuck on a scene, you have an idea of how you want it to sound, but you're not getting there yet, write it in the most basic terms. He opened the door. He did this. He did that. However you need to write it in the most basic form, just so you get your ideas down on the page. You can always go back later, spice up the language, do all that. I think just keep writing. Can I use real life experiences or people in my novel? Of course, I've touched on this already. I think yes, you can. So long as you, of course, if you're borrowing one for one, like I said, if you're borrowing one for one someone's personality, someone's name, someone's traits, maybe ask them first if they're a friend. If they're a stranger that you saw that you're inspired by their look or whatever, obviously you don't have to ask them. But if you're like literally adapting a friend of yours into your novel, or basing maybe a novel on a scenario that happened to you, something happened to you, like you went through a breakup and you're basing it on you and your ex's relationship, maybe try to get the permission if that's the case, or just make sure to change enough of the details where it won't be offensive. Is it okay to borrow ideas from other books? Of course. Everyone is inspired by everything. Like I said, in order to be a writer, you have to be an avid reader. So naturally, with reading, you're going to get inspired to write based on what you're reading. I feel like that's natural. So 100%, if you are inspired by, Dune or whatever, and you want to write a sci-fi story that's similar to Dune, obviously don't copy Dune exactly. Like, don't have all the exact same story beats and characters. But you can definitely borrow ideas, because like I said, nothing is new. No ideas are really new. Everything is just recycled. We've done the same like plot stuff over and over again so many times. So yeah, feel free to borrow. Just make sure to differentiate it enough to where it's unique to you. You're not literally stealing. Where do you find inspiration for your stories? Usually my dreams. My dreams are pretty wacky and wild, and also like real life. I like to think fantastically. I just like to think of like crazy stuff. Like, what if this was this? What if this happened? What if the world was structured like this? I just like to really be open-minded. I've hit a roadblock. I've not been, because I've been editing the novel that I've been writing now. I've not really been thinking about new ideas, though I do have a few ideas that I'm kicking around. But usually I'm inspired by like stuff I see. I'm inspired by stuff I read. I'm inspired by YouTube videos. There's plenty of stuff. There's so much stuff to be inspired by. Usually just real life. Real life inspires me. But I do have dreams occasionally where I'm inspired by stuff, and scenarios in my life, of course, inspire me as well. How many drafts should I write? This is another fantastic question. Stephen King talks about this a little bit in his book on writing. For me, I wrote about 5 drafts. It again is going to depend on you. I think first draft is always for you, is only for you. Don't share your first draft. That's what my professors made sure to say all the time, and that was a very, very pivotal thing in what they taught. Your first draft is for you. That's for you. You write it, you finish it, put it away, lock it up. That's for you. No one reads that. Second draft is when you polish stuff up, you're improving it. That's when you can share it with people. You want to get some readers to look it over, maybe some friends and family members to read it, give you some feedback on it. Third draft usually is when it's going to be at its best. I think I did. I went a little bit far. I went a little bit above and beyond. I think so. My answer, I guess I learned it as I was answering it. Maybe 3 drafts, 3 to 4 drafts. I wrote 1 or 2 that weren't finished, and then I wrote 3, 4, 5 that were complete drafts. So it really depends on what you mean by draft, because some drafts can be, oh, I wrote a fifth of the novel. I wrote 3/4 of the novel, and then I stopped because I ran out of ideas. I stopped because whatever. That still counts as a draft, even if it's not finished. A full draft, I guess, for full drafts, maybe 3. Should I edit as I go, or should I wait until the end? Another fantastic question. Do not edit as you go. That is the worst thing you can do. Write and then don't touch it. It's literally like write a page, print it out, lock it up in a box, and don't look at it. Editing as you go is a great way to procrastinate, and that's what I used to do when I was writing, when I was earlier in my drafts. I would write and then I would edit as I go, and I found that was a good way to not write anything new, because I'd be like, oh, I can't get this scene to sound good, so I'm going to spend all my time that I should be writing new stuff editing the old stuff that I wrote, which is a perfect way to waste time if you're in your early stages, if you're writing your first novel. Don't edit as you go. If you're in your first draft, it's going to be, some of the writing is going to be rough. That's just how it is, a rough draft for a reason. That's the name of it for a reason. The writing is not going to be perfect. The story is not going to be perfect. You're in your rough draft. Let it be the rough draft. Let that be what it is, because that writing needs those stages in order to get better. So yeah, I would definitely recommend against editing as you go, because it's a perfect way to waste time and to not write anything new. How do I know when my novel is done? This is a great story. I think as an author who is obsessed with perfectionism, I never feel like my novel is done. I read it and I can always find a sentence or two that I want to change and make different. I think it just comes down to people in your life who have read it and you. It usually comes down to you yourself deciding, okay, I'm not going to edit this anymore. I think this is where it should be. You just have to put your foot down as an author and say, I'm not going to touch this anymore. Because as writers, we have a tendency to obsess with details. We have a tendency to obsess with making everything sound as perfect as it can be. And there's no such thing as perfection. Perfection is something we chase, but it's not necessarily a tangible thing that you can achieve. So I feel like it's very crucial that you don't get in your own way with that. So your novel is done when you feel it's done. That's literally, it's a basic answer. It's sort of a phoning in answer, but it's done when you know it's done. Like, you just know when it's done. You have to sort of put your foot down and say, okay, I'm not going to touch this anymore. Do I need beta readers or critique partners? This is a great question. I like to have beta readers. So basically, I handed my novel out to all my friends. Some of them got back to me, some of them did not. But I did get plenty of feedback from my friends. What I like to do is, I write the novel, of course. I write a rubric for them to follow. So it's basically, if they don't have to fill it out, it's nothing they have to fill out. It's just a series of questions. It's a document, maybe one or 2 pages of questions related to plot, character, structure, syntax, language, all that sort of stuff that's involved in novel writing. I'm like, how did the language sound? How did the dialogue sound? Are the characters compelling? Do they have, are they 3-dimensional? Is the antagonist compelling? Do you understand their motivation? All this different stuff like that, basically. And I send it to my beta readers, and they would read the thing. They'd mark up the document as they read it, and then they'd get back to me and be like, and vaguely answer the questions with their feedback. So yeah, I think definitely it's crucial to have people in your life, whether it be friends, whether it be, there's plenty of writer groups where it's groups of people who've written stuff, who are just trying to get feedback on their writing. So look at your local colleges, your local libraries, look at forums online, of course. Like I said, Reddit is a great place for that stuff. There's plenty of spaces, especially today, where we're more connected than ever, where you can get people to put eyes on your work. But yes, I highly recommend that you have someone read it before you query an agent or go to get it published. What's the best way to revise a first draft? I think it's just to keep an open mind. And I keep coming back to that. It's just like when you're first drafting a novel, you could be very rigid in what you want to do. And then as you write, I think you sort of unlock your world and you're like, okay, I realize that I don't have to be as strict with how this unfolds. And I think when it comes to revising your first draft, don't be afraid to change things, because it's the first draft for a reason. It's the roughest. Think of it this way, that is the worst version of your novel, it sounds cruel, it sounds harsh, but it's true. First draft is the worst version of your novel, just it can only get better from here. So any improvements, any changes that you make will likely be for the better. I'm going to go out on a limb and say, approach it with an open mind. Don't be afraid to change things that you didn't think you'd change. Don't be afraid to re-examine your characters. Don't be afraid to re-examine your plot. Don't be afraid to look at everything, literally look at everything, and possibly change like fundamental aspects of your novel. But yeah, don't not do any of those stuff. Like, don't read it over again and be like, oh, this is perfect, I don't need to change it, because that's in no way true. There's no way that you sat down, wrote a first draft, and then it's perfect. Like, I don't think that's ever happened. You definitely have stuff to change. You definitely have stuff to improve. If you think that you don't, then that's when I know you need to have someone else read it, or someone else in your life like look at it to give you some perspective. If you're stuck, if you're feeling like you don't know where to turn, like you don't know what to change or what to fix, definitely reach out to people in your life, reach out to forums, blogs, whatever, to get some perspective on that. Should I self-publish or try traditional publishing? It's really up to you. Self-publishing has bloomed within the last, decade? Amazon allows you to publish your own stuff. There's plenty of ways to make your own covers, to make your own whatever have you, to do self-publishing. I think ebook self-publishing is really, like with Amazon, has really flourished within the last decade. So it's easier than ever to self-publish. I feel like it depends on your goals with your writing. Do you want notoriety? Do you want a smaller audience? Those sort of questions. Do you hope that maybe it'll get adapted into a film one day? It really depends on your goals with your writing. If you're thinking, I just want to write something and get it published as quickly as possible, then self-publishing is probably for you. If you're like me and you're like, okay, I spent so much time on this novel, I think it's thematically relevant to the times of today, I really want to see some return on my investment in monetarily in terms of having written this thing, then traditional publishing may be for you. I'm in the process of querying agents right now and getting my book published. So through traditional means. There's also traditional indie presses, which are smaller presses. They're not like the big publishing houses, which is smaller audience, but still like traditional publishing. Those are usually easier to get into because you don't need an agent to represent you. Most small indie presses, you can just like bring the novel yourself. You don't need any representation. With the bigger publishing houses like Penguin and Random House, you do need representation, because those places are huge. They don't accept submissions without some representation. So it really just depends on your goals with your writing. How do I query agents or publishers? It ties back into the last answer. If you want to go with a big publishing house, then you definitely need an agent. If you're going with an indie press, then you can query them yourself. Literally just look up like small presses. There's plenty of websites, and I may link some in the description. There's plenty of resources that aggregate different publishing houses, different agents, all that stuff. It's easier than ever, basically, to find agents, publishing houses, what have you. Do I need to copyright my novel before sending it out? No idea, no. No, I don't think so. How do I write a good query letter or synopsis? This is a fantastic question. I actually recently officially finished my query letter, because it's like your query letters are very specific. I'm not sure if you have to do it for indie publishing houses. I imagine you probably do. But it's very important if you're trying to go the traditional publishing method, because like your query letter is the first impression of your novel that your potential agent is going to be getting. So it's like it has to be snappy, pithy, whatever. It has to catch their attention. Usually you open with very brief, maybe 1 or 2 sentences about the novel itself. So what is your novel about, in a catchy, snappy sort of way to catch their attention. And then you can sort of dive into a synopsis, a very brief synopsis, because obviously the synopsis document itself is going to be, usually they're 1 page, and your query letter is the same. Like, agents get so many documents, you have to understand, like they get so many query letters, so many synopses, that they only have time to really look at 1 page usually. So it's like you got to condense the story down into 1 page. You got to condense your query letter, which is, I think it's about 450 words. You got to make it all fit on 1 page. You got to condense, make it digestible enough to where a person can sit down, read it, and get through essentially like 50 plus of those in a day if they're like an agent. So you really have to condense. It's a measure, it's a practice of succinctness. How can you boil down your novel to the key elements that make it snappy and appealing to someone who's not read it, who doesn't know who you are? that sort of thing. And sort of like, and part of the query letter is selling yourself a little bit. So it's like, what inspired you to write this novel? You don't necessarily have to have a whole bunch of credentials. Like, I don't have any credentials really. I mean, I've graduated college. That's pretty much it. I have experience writing. Like, that's basically all I have. It depending on what your personal experience is, your professional experience is, you may lean less into that stuff. Like in my career letter, I don't really lean too much into my personal background because it's not as relevant. I just sort of lean into what the novel is about and why I think it's relevant in today's society. Can I make a living as a novelist? No. Next question. It really depends. It depends on what your story is. It depends on, you as a person. It depends on the time in history. It's so many factors that factor into whether or not you can make a living as a novelist. I feel like Stephen King is probably the best example, and everyone compares themselves to him when it comes to writing novels. It's like this guy's been writing so many novels. He's written like 60 novels or something, which is insane. Most of us can only dream of getting that many. There's smaller novelists that I know who've written 2 or 3 novels who are not. I don't think they have a job that they work outside of their writing because it's just so difficult. It really just depends. I think realistically, no. In terms of dream wise, maybe. It depends on how many novels you've written. It depends on what the novels are about. It depends on, you as a person. What if no one reads or likes my book? Reading is very subjective. Novels are very subjective. There's going to be people who don't like your book. There's going to be people who like it. You just got to sort of keep that in mind. I'm very scared of that. I'm like, what if people read my novel and they're like, okay, we don't like this? That's just how it is. Like that, everything is subjective. There's people who, think of the best movie that you know. Think of the best show that you know. There's people who don't like that, and that's how it is with writing too. There's gonna be detractors. There's gonna be people who don't like your work. You just gotta sort of like go along with it. It just comes with the territory. Don't let it discourage you. I'd say that's probably the best thing I could say. Don't let it discourage you. There's always going to be people who like and don't like your stuff. That's part of creating. There's always going to be people who see your vision, who don't see your vision. It just comes with the territory, but don't let it discourage you. How do I overcome imposter syndrome as a writer? Just write. It took me forever to realize, like, I wrote this 400-page thing. And it feels like such a big accomplishment. And I feel like that's what motivated me too. It's like these words, this 105,000 words came from my brain. This all came from me. Like, how did I do this? I never thought in my life that I would do this. So sort of you just gotta hype yourself up, be like, I wrote this. Not many people have done this. There's plenty of people who've written novels, but it's like, how many people have written and published a novel successfully? That is much harder feat to do. So I feel like just gas yourself up. You are a writer. You've written a thing. If you've written a novel, you're a writer. Is writing a novel worth it, even if I never publish it? I'd say yes. It's an exercise of discipline. Having written a novel it takes a huge amount of time. So it's like, like I said, how many people have written, and how many people do you know that have written a novel? How many people do you know that have written an entire novel? That's a crazy thing. Exercise and discipline. It is definitely worth it because it can boost your self-worth for sure. Like, I definitely have increased my self-worth. My self-image my self-esteem has increased having written this novel because I'm like, damn, I wrote this novel. What do I do if people in my life don't support my writing? There's always someone who will. So if your friends and family don't, which I doubt that you'd have no one in your life who supported your writing. You've definitely got at least a few friends and a few family members who will support your writing. But it's not really about them. It's about you. You thought that something you had to say was important enough to write a novel out of. So do it. Don't let people discourage you. It's the same with anything else in your life. Don't let someone else tell you not to do something because they don't think that it's worthwhile or whatever. Definitely do it. Definitely commit yourself to it. I would say don't think about them. They don't even matter. They don't make no more noise than a fart in a paper bag. All right, final question. How do I stay consistent and not give up halfway through? Now, I sort of touched on this already. Just write. If you feel like you're stuck, if you feel like you have writer's block, if you've hit a wall in the writing process, you just gotta thug it out. You just gotta keep going. Like I said, take breaks, go outside, talk to friends, talk to people in your life, talk to strangers. Just live your life, but don't give up. That is the way you fail. The only way you fail in this, I like to think of this in a very positive way. The only way that you fail is when you give up. So don't give up. If you're definitely gonna hit, like I said, you're gonna hit points in the writing where you don't know what to say, where you're stuck, where you don't have an idea of what you want to do. You just got to keep going. You got to push through them. Even if it involves just going a completely different way, adding a new character, adding a new villain, adding a new scenario, adding a different element to the plot that you didn't think that you would, switching the genre midway through, whatever it takes to keep you writing. And you may end up tossing that stuff later. You may end up ditching it later because it doesn't fit. But just as long as you keep writing, then it's worth it. I would say the only way you fail is if you give up entirely. So don't give up. Do not give up. All right, that has been the video. 32 questions. This video is very long. I'm going to try to trim it up as much as I can. Hope you guys have enjoyed this. I hope it was helpful to at least some of you. I'm really passionate about this stuff, if you couldn't tell. I love writing. Writing has been my life since I was a kid, man. I used to have notebooks, little like notebooks full of stories that were so bad. They were so bad. I wonder if I honestly don't know if I still have them or not, or if I've taken pictures of them, the stories that I used to write. But I was inspired back then by like Mario and Luigi and superhero stuff. Of course, I was a kid, so I was a little kid. So, but yeah, writing has been part of my life for such a long long time. And now that I'm at this point where I've written one novel and it's 400 pages, it's insane. It's actually crazy, and I feel very accomplished, even though it's not published yet, and it may never be published. Knock on wood that it is, of course, because I really, really have sunk so much time into this thing. I'm gonna get it published. I'm hell bent on getting it published, but. Yeah, I just feel so proud of myself. It really has gone far in boosting my self-confidence, my self-worth. It's just impressive, and everyone in my life has been really, really kind and receptive to giving me feedback, to helping me along the way, and I really am thankful for my friends and my family for being so supportive of my writing. I know that's not the case with everyone, but I feel very grateful that I have a support group which is as supportive as it is of my writing and my endeavors as a writer. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope it was helpful. I plan on making more of this, more videos like this as I go through the publishing process. Of course, I may make a video on like how to query an agent and how to make edits to your novel based on what your agent says and stuff like that, how to get your novel published. So there's different steps basically along the way. This is like the first step in the process. Since I finished the novel, now I've got to start getting it queried, I've got to start finding an agent, and then I've got to find a publishing house. So you guys are going to take this journey with me essentially as I go through the writing process. I'm very excited to be able to hold my novel whenever it gets published. It's going to be like essentially holding a child. I feel like Nick Miller holding the Pepperwood Chronicles for the first time. You are of me. This novel is of me. But yes, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate the support. Leave a like, drop a comment if you found this helpful. Leave any suggestions for any future writing videos that you guys may like to see. I love helping people. I love giving advice. It's definitely something that I'm very passionate about, especially when it comes to writing. So if there's any specific topics that you guys would like to, within writing, you guys would like to hear me talk about, feel free to leave a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.